I'm James Smith, and this is the GovX Digital Show, the televisual extravaganza that counts us down to the GovX Digital Conference in November. I've been working with a lot of passionate and committed public servants to build what will be the biggest ever public sector transformation conference. And on the GovX Digital Show, you get to meet them. But not just meet them, you'll get to hopefully learn more about their background and motivations, as well as their views on the current state and future direction of the public sector. Every one of them is an enthusiast for the public good. So please like us, subscribe to the channel, follow the podcast, and express all possible warm feelings via your podcast platform of choice. And whilst we're in the mood for a little bit of self-promotion, make sure you tell your friends, colleagues, and maybe even your neighbours, because you can never have too much government transformation in your life. So enough of that. Here in the UK, we've recently had a couple of major speeches, the first of which was the privilege of public service by Michael Gove, who's the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and Cabinet Office Minister. For the non-UK government nerds, Gove is the Cabinet Minister responsible for the operations of the UK Civil Service, and he has a track record of government transformation from a previous stint as the Secretary of State for Education. The second big speech was by Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. Now, in both of these speeches, they set out the same sort of vision for a public sector that needs to learn lessons from the strengths and weaknesses of its response to COVID. A consistent and key theme, I think, that came across from both speeches was the need for the public sector to be more willing to embrace risk and learn from failure. As we prepare for the GovX Digital Conference in November, with over 130 speakers and considerably more than 1,000 audience participants, I have spoken to a lot of civil servants, health executives, and local government officials, both here in the UK and in Europe and North America. It's a real perk of the job. So from these conversations, it's clear that we've seen the risk profile of government change in quite significant ways. Money is being spent and interagency collaboration has been green-lighted at speed, breaching long-standing and previously unyielding governance and departmental sovereignty barriers. In this brave new world of increased willingness to allow for public sector innovation and invention, I think it focuses particular attention on the role of local government, because ultimately all implementation is local. So it was great to catch up with a long-standing friend of GovX Digital, David Wilde, an accomplished senior executive who's worked on policy, technology, services, place, health, in key roles in central government, in local government and in the NHS, both in London and in Essex. Here we go. So David, we first met 10 years ago, I think, when you were the CIO of Westminster City Council. Your career in the public sector goes back quite a way further back than that. Doesn't look like that, of course. But how did you get into the public sector originally, and what kept you there for so long?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, going way back into the 80s, what got me into the public sector was one of those tactical decisions. You kind of admit, do I go on to university or do I earn a living? And I went into the job centre and they said, oh, you've got A-levels. Do you want to work here? And I went, oh, yeah, this looks all right. Quite nice. The orange chairs, as they were back then, were a bit much, but I thought it looked like a nice environment. I'll give this a go. Next thing I knew, this is good, filling some forms. Next thing I knew, I had an interview at a thing called a UBO. Never been to one before, benefit office. So I turned up at Guildford UBO for the interview, and where I first came across wire mesh screens, bolted down benches, and was ushered through a steel door into the manager's office. 25-minute interview, at the end of which he said, congratulations, we're offering you a job. If you don't take it now, we will suspend any rights you have to benefits for the next 6 weeks. See you on Monday. And that started my public service career. And after a few years, it's incentivization, I suppose. But what I found very quickly when working in local government, and I was brought up as son of a soldier, so I spent most of my life living abroad and what have you. I very quickly developed a passion for what public service is really about, which is about improving, protecting the vulnerable, improving quality of life, and making a difference. And that kind of just played some of my core values, which have always been with me through my life, around doing the right thing and actually helping. And so as the careers developed through public sector, and I went, through dealing with benefits and becoming, benefits office manager in London, I then tripped over into the world of IT by agreeing to take up a role building finance systems on mainframes up in Sheffield. And from there, which again was quite entertaining, I took the job and turned up in Sheffield, was presented with 5 volumes of Dun and Bradstreet General Ledger Systems design, told to read it and build a general ledger system for the employment service, which at that time handled £3 billion a year. So I had a crash course in how to build general ledger systems. And that kind of took me up through the kind of IT world. Built a bunch of finance systems and IT systems in the employment service, broadened out into employment department, and then went from there into education policy, kind of shift left. And the reason I kind of tell that story is one of the other things I found in public service is your opportunities, should you want to take them, are huge. Public service touches every aspect of people's lives. And you can, if you want to, and if you have the adventurous nature, I do like moving around, you can move into very different areas and learn completely new skills, and actually continue to make that difference. So, and your core transferable skills that you build up over that time and as you go up the ladder and become more senior, enable you to create that bedrock on which you then build that extra set of skills. So all my time in benefits, I learned about how to deal with people sympathetically, truly understand what was going on. And I dealt with some very, very challenging stuff in London around, supporting people coming out of detox, and all that kind of stuff, through to managing, offices dealing with people with very, very challenging problems at crisis points in their life, through into building large-scale IT systems and all the disciplines I had to learn around engineering and architectural design in IT. And then in education policy, learning how to articulate briefly and clearly very big and complex options and decisions that ministers need to take. And you bring all that together and you look back on it and you think, wow, that's a lot of stuff. Very, very different, but what was important about all of it was all about contribution to the good, contribution to how public service serves its residents, serves its businesses, serves its serves the country. Then I was headhunted. Did the CIO role in Office of Deputy Prime Minister and did all that kind of stuff for a number of years, and then fast forwarding, by that point I kind of hit the kind of bottom rung of the senior civil service and what have you, and then I was headhunted into this place in East London called Waltham Forest, where I thought, that's interesting. I'll try local government. Done all central government now. I'll try local government, and I joined Waltham Forest at a very dark time. It was the second worst performing council in the country. Awful lot of things had happened, and I joined there as the CIO, as it was called back then, the head of information, and then became head of information customer services, became CIO, what have you. And that then opened my eyes to hyperlocal delivery, which is, to my mind, what local government is really about. So I went from my career operating at national organisations in Whitehall and all that fun stuff, and doing some big policy things in my times at DTLR, Transport Local Government Regions and Office of Deputy Prime Minister, into a kind of 17 square miles, 270,000 people, 400 services crammed into a little piece of East London. And it was that point where, and one of the things, frankly, that attracted me was, whilst policy is fascinating and informing and supporting big decisions is fascinating, the great thing about local government is you do stuff. You do stuff for real people that you can see and touch and meet and stuff. And you can see that the impact of what you do on a very tight geography is quick and it's material. And that, then I fell in love with local government, in terms of its ambition, its clarity of purpose, the closeness of the politics to the residents, in terms of how that's influenced. And then I basically stayed there, went into Westminster, went on to Essex, and spent 14 years, operating at that sort of senior leader level, in those organisations. But throughout that whole thing, it has been, again, back to those core values for me, which is around, how can I help? How can I contribute? What is it I give back? How can we help make things better for people out there without it sounding too cheesy?
It was a relief to...
That was a long-winded answer to your
No,
question.
no, it's very good. It's a relief to know that you weren't sort of press ganged by that executive at the unemployment benefits office in Guildford, and that's the only reason why you stayed in the public sector. So, I mean, I'm particularly interested by your experience in Waltham. Obviously, you went into the local authority at a difficult time. What were you able to achieve whilst you were there with the team?
Well, it was a good one. I mean, in the space of the 4 years I was there, basically, we the place was on the floor for a variety of reasons. There was no money. There'd been some significant upheaval, both politically and administratively. So we had a completely new senior leadership team. I was part of that team, and the IT was still firmly stuck in the 90s, and this was 2004. So we were just exiting a mainframe system, good old-fashioned mainframe system. And we were in the process of doing similar on social care and what have you. So what I achieved in those 4 years was basically built a new IT function from the ground up. So we went through restructure, went through all that process, and that was the entity we created. What we also did was establish a strategy that integrated the technology into the rest of the business, as the rest of the business was building its strategies from scratch. So there was an awful lot of scorched earth kind of stuff going on in Waltham Forest at the time. But it gave us a great opportunity to integrate technology into business delivery, take advantage of what technology could do in terms of shifting how people work. So we did, and actually, this would be an interesting one for you. Way back in 2004, and it quite ties in with today. In 2004, I used the term, we're going to deploy IT on a martini basis. And they went, so what do you mean? I said, well, anytime, any place, anywhere, right? Yeah. Remember the old adverts for those that are old enough? And that was our strapline. So that was the first time I created something called the End User Computing Project, and I called it End User Computing back in the days. Yeah, and we basically moved the workforce from localized. This is back in the days when they had localized server, localized storage. It wasn't able to be seen. We actually had buildings you couldn't log on to. So if you worked in Walthamstow, you could not log on at Leytonstone because the Leyton Municipal Office was on a separate network with a separate. That's how old it was. So we brought a single IT platform across the whole council. We started to explore the broadband side of things as well, because of course in 2004 broadband didn't exist. So connectivity was ISDN and dial-up still off the corporate network. But during that period, 04 to 08, broadband began to come through, and mobile working began to kind of happen. We started rolling out laptops, and so some social workers were able to do, this is all offline, but were able to do home visits and actually start collecting information. So that was the stuff that we did. It all culminated in 2007. We won the, back in those days, the national awards. This was before the days of UK IT awards, the big kind of show that you have every year. This year, well, its forerunner was the National E-Government Awards. And in Waltham Forest, we won the National E-Government Award for IT transformation of the whole council. So we went from being somewhere that was in a very bad place with lots of demotivated people and a completely broken up IT function, to a function that was award-winning, delivered a single version of the truth, brought in that technology as an enabler to support how people could work better. And it became an integral part of actually how the success story of Waltham Forest, going from, in those days, the old comprehensive performance assessment days, the old audit commission days. In 4 years, it went from no stars to 4 stars, which was, a real success story. From a personal point of view as a CIO, one of the key things underneath all that, though, for me was building that IT team from the ground, giving them confidence and building competence for that team to succeed going forward. And so a large part of what I did through the restructuring and reorganisation was also putting in place CPD, continuing professional development, to support the new IT function to go forward with IT as it worked through. And that, I think, is still to this day. I mean, there are people that I brought in, people that had new roles as a result of restructure that are still there today, doing good. And Waltham Forest is still doing fine in the technology world. So it's good to see. That's so long ago.
And then after that, obviously, you went to Westminster and then on to Essex. So,
Yeah.
what were the, I suppose, the challenges that you encountered as you joined those organisations, and what were you able to achieve in the time that you were?
Yeah, I mean, very, very different. I mean, all three of them are very, very different for different reasons. I mean, having gone from Waltham Forest with the particular issues and challenges we had there, and then taking up the role as CIO at Westminster of a global city, and it is. I mean, the size and complexity of what you're dealing with in 8 square miles, which is what it is it requires a step change in thinking, and that's one of the first things. So all my old knowledge and history from my sort of policy days in Whitehall came flooding back, because I was dealing with 8 square miles, but I was having to think national and international again. Yeah. Which was very important. So my role clearly covered all the technology side and digital and what have you, but also in working with the business areas in the same way that I did with Waltham Forest, about integrating into how we deliver services successfully. But of course, the kind of services we're talking about here are CCTV facilities that are supporting counter-terrorism. It's a global city. Yeah. Dealing with 1.2 million people a day coming in and out of the city, and all the logistics that deals with. Dealing with high density population, dealing with an economy that is funding large parts of the rest of the country on its own. Yeah. And so the engagements in those 3 years in Westminster was about being able to, yes, we did end user computing again. I did another one of those, and now, thankfully, broadband was out and about. We moved the entire workforce to proper mobile working. So we got rid of all desktops. We were actually Europe's biggest rollout of Link, the forerunner of Skype, which we rolled out to the entire council, and we got rid of desk phones. So we did in 2008 through 2011 what a lot of organisations have only just done as a result of COVID. Interesting. Yeah. But the idea was, it was hot desking. We went to 2-to-1 ratio on staff to desks in 2009, 10. Lightweight laptops are standard. Mobility was the name of the game. Mobile flexible working was the name of the game, but supporting the success of an incredibly dynamic, incredibly diverse, and very intense global city. Great fun. We, and again, we did very well, and we won some. We were very successful. We were award winners on a number of fronts there with the UK IT Awards, funnily enough, and I was privileged enough to be voted European CIO of the Year in 2011 on the back of some of the successes that we'd had in that area. And then from there, of course, going to Essex, where I live, and I've lived for over 25 years. And when the opportunity came up, to when I was asked to come here, or come to Essex, it was again at an interesting time, not dissimilar to Westminster, in that the IT was in a spot of bother. They were coming out of an unsuccessful contract with an outsourced deal, which required, again, building a completely new IT function, restructuring and bringing all that into place, and rebuilding confidence in IT. Confidence was at an all-time low in Essex in 2011. And there was a lot of federated IT, shadow IT as we call it these days, going on. And an organisation that was desperate to get out from under it, but did recognise that technology could enable them to really move forward in terms of the way they work. And so we, again, did an end-user computing project. We also did a next-generation network project, and we did a whole bunch of other stuff that moved us into the forefront of technology, mobile flexible working, all the rest of that kind of came through, and process built a new IT function. But more broadly, we reached much more into the place arena. And that for me was, I learned a huge amount in Westminster and actually in Waltham Forest around the whole place-based design piece and the importance of technology in shaping and supporting that at the infrastructure level, which is something I think local government has not been as clear about, but is becoming more clear about, that its role is absolutely central to be enabling at the infrastructural level what digital can really do for communities. Yeah, and that's a spatial challenge. That really came to the fore for me in Essex through the establishment of the Superfast broadband programme. So Essex, hugely rural, very few people able to get decent broadband. Back when we first looked at it, I think it was 60% of the population could actually get broadband of 8 meg. So 40% couldn't. That's a big gap in 1.5 million people. It's a lot of numbers. And it's all about, Saxon villages, rural hinterland and all that fun stuff. So the Superfast Essex programme, I first did the business case for it way back in 2011, so late 2011, early 2012. And it was to persuade the members, the politicians, that it would be worthwhile putting a little bit of capital, at the time it's £4 million capital, to match funds from government money to start tackling this problem. And they agreed, and the programme was born. Now, the success of that programme now is it's now an £87 million programme, of which only 11 million has come from the county council over its years. But what it's done is it's closed that gap from 64% to 93%, pushing on to 95%. Now, the economic impact, and that's in the space of what, 8 years? Now, think about the importance of connectivity for economy today. Home working, mobile flexible working, the ability for businesses to grow, the ability for businesses to survive.
This podcast.
Yeah.
So
if we hadn't done that and we hadn't started that program then and progressed it through, and I know everyone talks about ultrafast now, and I absolutely agree, ultrafast is the next destination, but let's be honest, back in 2011-12, ultrafast, fibre to the premise, was a much tougher ask back then, and we were having to fix some basics as we went through. But I think that has been absolutely key to the Essex population being able to adapt and sustain quality of life, jobs, businesses through what we've just gone through in the last 3 months and beyond and forwards. And now, we talk about these days, the rhetoric around connectivity now is the fourth utility. Of course it is. It can't be viewed as anything else. Yeah. It's not just about being a utility, it's a utility of a quality. So, water, it's about clean water, it's about drinkable water, and it's about it being available all the time. Connectivity, it's about reliability, it's about speed. Yeah. And connectivity, it's about ease of connectivity. So you can translate through, how that utility has become absolutely critical. The tie-in with that now, I think, around place is around recognition, I think, in terms of spatial design now, that connectivity and the technology, the infrastructure that you look at around place is no longer about highways and buildings and green space and retail versus business versus public, services. It is on I would say that's kind of the verticals, but if you look at the horizontal, it has to be about mesh networks, connectivity. Yeah, it's about Wi-Fi coverage. Yeah, it's about what is the domestic offer, what is the industrial offer. Yeah, it is about energy and environment and efficiency. Yeah, so how are you going to ensure that you can maximize renewable opportunities, so solar panel roofs, all that kind of stuff. I think we're now beginning to get into that kind of thinking. And I think it's healthy and good that spatially we're now starting to think that way. My challenge, which I put out there to many of my colleagues in local government, is we should be influencing and driving that. What is it we can do in those kind of designs that can unlock, for instance, on renewables, you can unlock storage of electricity from multiple rooftops rather than just selling it back to the grid. Yeah, what can we do differently in that space? How do you then hide that kind of storage facility under green assets that people can use? Yeah. How do we look at how things get moved around, people, goods, data, in a way that doesn't require everybody having their own garage? Yeah. In industrial estates, we need to move away from every industrial unit having its own loading bays for 16 wheelers, and instead looking at more intense industrial units with logistics parks next to the major trunk roads. Yeah, and moving goods and goods and from where the stuff's produced to getting it into those logistics parks, which would better serve logistics industry, because they could more easily then and more efficiently move stuff around on full loads of multiple clients rather than part loads. It's that kind of thinking.
How,
That, for me, that's
how,
local government all day long.
how difficult has it been to get the various arms of Essex County sort of working together in order to get that sort of consolidation? I mean, it sounds like that would be a tough challenge.
Well, it was. I mean, the last time, I left in October 17. And before I left, some of the markers that we put down there, I think, are still standing us in good stead. Actually, the sense of collaboration in public service is a lot stronger than people think. I mean, the district-county relationships, provided people understand and are clear about what the relative roles and responsibilities are, work very well. So some of the things that we put through, I put through in 16 and 17, 15, 16, 17 were, a heritage strategy. Which was a joint, piece of work that we did with the districts about how we can maximise the heritage assets in the county and how we work together and to support them to kind of sustain and grow localised heritage and arts, which, as we know, are constantly under threat, never more so than they are today. And that turned itself into some tangible benefits. Where we part funded renewable the refurbishment and redevelopment of the Mercury Theatre in Colchester to enable them to secure other funding from elsewhere, and that was a full-on collaboration between the Colchester Borough Council, working with the County Council, working with the theatre, working with the Arts Council to secure that. So that kind of localised stuff works really well. The bigger ticket items were the housing growth strategy, which we brokered with all of the districts and with the unitaries, where we agreed a common position around, what the drivers were, what the imperatives were around in Essex to make this stuff work and work well, and an explicit recognition from the beginning that the housing growth that's needed in Essex is a fact. The demographics are what they're going to be. We're going to need these houses. It's not a question of whether it's going to happen or not. Let's get over denial. Let's have a grown-up conversation about how we work together through duty to cooperate to make it a success. And the tangible gains you're seeing about that coming through now in Essex are, the garden settlements that we're seeing coming around in the north of the county and mid of the county, through to the new junction being built on the M11, which then opens up the top end of Harlow. So, that kind of stuff is all tangible examples of districts and county working together. Yeah. Our challenge, all too often, isn't around that kind of local government to local government piece. It's about how better do we work across agencies. So health and social care, really good example. We operated and we worked quite well at a kind of superficial level in agreeing standards around things like sustainability and transformation plans and that kind of stuff around how we can support primary care and acute care and delayed transfers of care out of hospitals and stuff like that. But I think I'd say until recently there were still challenges really driven by structural defects within public sector. And what I mean about that is that there are three areas, I think, where that comes through. The first one is money, budgets, and the way in which money is allocated out. Now, some people remember there was the total place concept stuff under David Cameron's administration, where a lot of local authorities, Essex was one, and I was involved in it, where we did a load of work around total place, and we understood the quantum of public money being spent in Essex as a county, and how differently could we do things if it wasn't all packaged up in different pots. And they were good intellectual exercises, but sadly they didn't turn into anything material. Yeah, because the reality is, we as a country have a funding model that is predicated on a variety of ways in which that funding is raised, not through different types of taxation, and we hold individual entities to account on how they use that funding. which plays against people pooling money. It's hard to pool, and it's hard to share ownership. Yeah. And it's hard to quantify benefit. So that structural defect around that, I think, still challenges a lot of local public sector being able to collaborate at that spatial level. Yeah. I think the second kind of structural piece is around conflicting accountability. So local government is very clearly accountable through the electoral process. Yeah. And of course, with two-tier councils, you have two lots. So you end up inevitably with scope for conflict, which can be counterproductive. Yeah. And you see that in a lot of two-tier kind of geographies. But of course, on top of that, you then have the NHS, which is not politically accountable except at the Whitehall level. Yeah. So how do you reconcile that set of conversations? Yeah, and those drivers. There was an attempt through health and wellbeing boards, but they have no power. So there is no means by which you can kind of push through conflict and come out the other side. Yeah. And we're very good in public sector about talking about wicked problems and difficult conversations, but we don't like it, and people don't like doing it. And I think that remains a real challenge in public sector. The third one, and I think it's the one that's well rehearsed and everybody knows out there, is how little of funding is actually devolved to local government. Yeah, we do know the vast majority is still set at the national level. It's set at the Whitehall level, and this is the ongoing debate, which is true. It's a fact of life. The local government association highlights that, many others highlight Solace, and the other kind of bodies, if you like, in the local government world. And have we seen that shift? Combined authority and elected mayors is kind of the push through. You do this, you get some delegation. But let's look at the big numbers. How much money is really being delegated relative to the total spend? It's tiny. Yeah, even the biggest delegations around infrastructure projects, it's small numbers. Yeah, so I think for us to really move around this kind of stuff, there needs to be some seismic shift across all three of those. Now, the last 3 months with COVID, I think we've seen some massive change, which I do hope sticks. The extent of collaboration and the depth of collaboration that I have seen at the spatial level between agencies through necessity, yeah, has crashed through those barriers around territorial ownership and institutional thinking. I think it's incredibly healthy. And if we do nothing else off the back of this, then harness that and continue to let that grow and develop, I think we will see some seismic changes in the way in which local services can be delivered. And I'm thinking particularly around primary healthcare, independent living, social care, and how that can be really reshaped. Massive opportunity there. I think the other area where we've seen that shift as well is I've seen, off the back of what's happened, and is a seismic shift in spatial thinking. Yeah, and what I mean by that is a recognition that building things cheap and stacking them high and packing a lot of people in them isn't a good idea necessarily, especially when people are in lockdown for 12 weeks in flats. And what about the green space? So let's rethink that stuff. And the other thing, of course, is around transportation and movement. So mass transit methods of providing transportation are being challenged fundamentally over the social distancing piece. Just need to look at London, and I just look at my days in Westminster, and underpinning that is TfL's funding model, which is predicated on cramming as many people as you can into the tube, which then subsidise every other angle. Well, hang on, we can't do that anymore. So what are we going to do? So which then reopens the public subsidy question around public transport. What's the real benefit for it? And I think personally we need to then probably revisit and look back and see what places like Vienna and Berlin are doing. And we need to maybe look back into Europe and maybe learn some other lessons, about how we might have to do this differently. So that I think that challenge, and that then brings you into the funding kind of challenge. The third one is around the kind of the use of the necessity for assets and office and business and residential and retail. I think, again, on spatial design, town centres. How many years now have we talked about town centres being in trouble, and let's do this and let's do that, and how we reinvigorate shops? I think what we've just seen in the last 3 months is a swift conclusion to a lingering death, which was retail as we knew it. Yeah. And I suppose the question that then comes back out of that is, okay, so what do we need to have that's different? Is it Westfield type modelling on a smaller scale? Is it something that can embrace online and make omni-channel in the John Lewis sense of working more realistic? And does that mean that retail units are actually going to be more in the way of compartmentalized in buildings rather than shops being shops in their own right? What does that mean for business rates? Totally different models, right? Also tied in with that is, and I welcome this, is the recognition that town centre living, residential mixed with retail, is a good thing. It lowers crime, because what you don't end up with is people hanging around in areas where the shops are closed and no one lives. It shifts that. It extends the day into the evening as well, because it then creates the cafe culture and that more usefulness around geographies over a longer period of time, and creates a healthier community. And you can tie in the whole healthy living thing into it and all the rest of it. And I think so, rethinking spatial design around quality of life, around community cohesion, and around local, I think is absolutely where we need to be going, and that's going to be quite exciting. So that kind of challenge coming through, and then tying in with that is, let's move away from block thinking, CBD, retail and housing estate. It's just it's not where we need to be. Let's blend that, mix it. I think one of the other realities is, going back to how do we put this? Going back to office block working ain't going to happen. People aren't going to wear it. And every other host of calls and conferences and stuff with people I've had in recent months, the recognition is the workforce isn't going to wear it. Businesses might want it to come back, but actually people can move, and they will move. And if you don't provide the kind of working environment that they want to work in, they will be empowered to move to where they will. So those organisations that think they can go back to the way it was are the organisations that we won't see in 4 years' time. Those organisations that embrace and recognise the fact that, funny thing about work, you employ adults, treat them like adults, be clear about what they're there to do and what they're there to deliver, and have that grown-up conversation, and they'll do it. You don't have to sit over them like a teacher and watch and see everything they're doing in an office environment. It's gone, it's done, it's finished. Move on. Do it differently. So I think on the back of that, that again will release real estate, repurpose that real estate for residential. Let's have a more fundamental look at how we can then get into land assembly, land redesign. Local authorities, by implication of going through this process, will be releasing a load of their own land, because we're all guilty of having office blocks and we don't need them anymore. Use that as part of redoing those jigsaws. Let's start creating some places that don't need cars that go into the middle of them, that don't segment what we do, so we're all treated like lemmings going from A, B to C, and actually something that creates a pleasant environment, a kind of Welwyn Garden City type thing. That worked. Where you're creating what it is people want to be in, and it's desirable. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Looking back at your career, what would be something that you'd like to be able to change, not necessarily in your own career, but in terms of local government?
I wish I had been able to do more on the neighbourhood renewal programme. So back when I worked in ODPM, where neighbourhood renewal programme was a fantastic programme in dealing with the most deprived parts of the country, and targeting resources, and it was almost kind of a total place round one. I wish I'd been able, as part of that team, we as a team had been able to stay longer, to reach more deeply into that, because I think where that programme was going and the ambitions it had could have probably accelerated total place by years and actually made it tangible. But that, again, that kind of gets you to the heart of what I was saying about one of the reasons, I was keen to go from central to local, is in central government, we're very good at concept, we're very good at policy, but it's actually damn hard to make it real.
So speaking about vision from the centre, we recently had a speech from Michael Gove, the Minister for Cabinet Office. So he gave a lecture at Ditchley, and he seemed to highlight that in central government, they're hoping to encourage civil servants to take more risk. They want the civil service to reflect the greater diversity of modern Britain, to decentralise decision-making, to bring it close to communities, and also to actually execute faster in response to the needs of citizens. So this is obviously a fairly ambitious wish list. What do you think some of the challenges and impediments might be to sort of fulfilling that wish list?
I've heard take risk throughout my career. I heard take risk in the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, and now. Yeah. So for the best part of 35 years, 36 years, I've heard that term, take risk. What does it mean? What does take risk mean? Okay. There are some fundamentals around what's the civil service about. Civil service is there to deliver what the government has been elected to do. So that's what the civil service is there to do, right? So challenge back to those ministers on, right, civil servants, you must take risk. You're the decision makers. You're asking us to take risks, but you're the decision makers. Let's just remember the fundamentals of democracy around what this is really about. So I'd love somebody just to get over telling civil servants to take risks and actually be a little bit more focused on what it is you actually want civil servants to do for you. Yeah. Okay. So that's my first challenge around that. And so I'd go right back to Michael, to Michael Gove and say, unpack, to use the consultant term, shall we unpack that? Yeah, and really understand. Are you saying that you want braver briefing to help you make more difficult decisions? I'm with you all the way, because that's the role of the civil service. Yeah, if you want the civil service to unilaterally go and do stuff to find out some stuff, then you've got a constitutional challenge around how they can do that, right? Because actually, I would again take that on another level. You do have an area that can take risk. It's local government, and it has a constitutional position to do that. But what it needs is it needs a conversation with central government as to how best to make that happen. So my challenge back on take risk is, let's not just focus on civil service here. Let's look at everything you've got to work with, and actually you can run some quite high profile experiments, projects, programs in conjunction with local authorities around particularly targeted issues to make a difference. I mentioned my regret about neighbourhood renewal programme. That is a textbook example that we could have taken. The next step would have been to work with, say, 10 local authorities out of those deprived areas we were dealing with, and actually, okay, let's set some money aside and really do some targeted interventions to make an impact, learn the lesson, and then replicate it across the rest. That for me is the kind of risks that would make sense. Does that make sense? Yeah,
it does.
Yeah, and that for me would actually bring central and local government a little bit more closer together, which would be quite nice, I think. And we'll kind of see that through. I think in a funny sort of way, that's partly what the combined authorities have been trying to do, but it's predominantly around transport and infrastructure. And I still think that we're still avoiding my earlier point. People don't like having the difficult conversation, like talking about having a difficult conversation without doing it. And the difficult conversation is about societal change, not about infrastructure change. And so show me the combined authority that's going to get into societal change.
It's been great to catch up with you, David, and I'm really pleased that you'll be joining us in November at GovX Digital, where you'll be speaking in a couple of sessions, as well as moderating some of our key panel discussions on health and local government. So we're set to have over 130 speakers like David, with a 50-50 split from the UK and overseas, bringing together experience from around the world for what will be the biggest lineup of public sector transformation speakers ever. So to ensure that everyone who wants to be involved can be involved, a friendly reminder to those of you listening in that GovX Digital has a combination of free, yes, free, and paid for passes for public sector executives. But there's not an infinite supply of these free passes. So my friendly advice is to go sooner rather than later to 2020.govx.digital to grab your free conference ticket, or if you're in the mood, to buy an on-demand conference pass. These on-demand conference passes essentially allow you, after the event, to access all of the recorded content from the entire conference. So it allows you essentially to be in two places at the same time and not miss any of the great presentations and panel discussions we have lined up. So you can click the link below if you're watching on YouTube, or check out the show notes if you're listening via a podcast platform, and you'll see a link to the conference website. So I've been James Smith, you've been great, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the GovX Show and at the GovX Digital Conference in November. Bye.